Welcome back to the Change Your Filter podcast. I'm your host, Paul Redman. We are brought to you, as we are each and every week, by Contractor Commerce, our company. We saw a future where every contractor would have an online store, and we've been working really hard and we're making that happen. So in a couple of weeks, there's a new product coming out from Contractor Commerce. Today's a little sneak peek as we think about how AI has kind of intersected with e-commerce for contractors. And you'll get to meet someone who's been working on that with us. So today I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Chris Lovejoy. Chris is a doctor in the UK who turned AI operator, AI expert, and builder. He spent the last several years, really 10 years, working with startups and has really been on the forefront of AI before AI was even part of the normal conversation in business. So he's got a really interesting perspective because he understands like the implications, but also like the practical reality of what AI can do for businesses and do for really humanity. Really, really smart guy. Really enjoyed my conversation with him. Again, just a sneak peek to what's coming with Contractor Commerce and part of the team that is bringing the next version of e-commerce to reality. So please enjoy this conversation with my good friend, Dr. Chris Lovejoy. Chris, welcome to the Change Your Filter podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Paul.
Yeah, so I was sharing this with you. You know, I don't know you that well. I've been in tons of meetings with you and been watching you interact with my team. So I wanted to introduce you to kind of our community here at Contractor Commerce and also learn from you and share some insight that I think you might be able to share with our audience. But I should probably rephrase my introduction. It's Dr. Lovejoy. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. I'm happy to talk a bit about my background for context if it's helpful here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, tell me your kind of career story. Where did you grow up? You're obviously, you're not from North Carolina, as I can tell by your accent. So tell us your kind of personal and career story, and then we'll get into medicine and tech and all those sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I was born in Cambridge in the UK, grew up in the UK, and so I went to, basically my whole life. And then when it came to picking my choice for university or college, as it's called in the US, I was kind of torn between doing medicine and doing maths or computer science. I really enjoyed the kind of maths and computer science side of things. Decided to go for medicine in the end because it felt, it may sound a bit cliche, but like there's more tangible, value I can add to society by training as a doctor. So kind of went down that route, but then always in the back of my mind had computer science, maths interests, and explored that in various forms throughout university. And then when I graduated, I worked as a doctor for a few years in the National Health Service in London. But off the back of that, I was kind of exploring machine learning around 2015, 2016. It was kind of becoming a big thing. You had kind of progressions, particularly with like image analysis at the time. There's lots of applications of that in healthcare. So I kind of moved more into that initially at specifically applying AI into healthcare, but actually branched out from that as well into other domains. And I think my career took a bit of a pattern of, spending a few years explicitly not working in healthcare, working in some kind of like AI field applied to different domains, different verticals, and then kind of coming back into more like a healthcare focus. And that's just really by chance it's happened that way. But I worked at a big kind of grocery data analysis company that does is kind of the main data science provider for Walmart and for Tesco in the UK and various other big companies, analyzing huge amounts of data, like learn a lot from that experience. Then started my own company, which again was like in the healthcare space, then worked at some more general companies. Then I was part of the founding team of a company called Anterior, which we were building, or the company is still building large language model based, large language model powered products for health insurance in the US, particularly that prior authorization was our first products. And then now kind of like moving into more general applications. And that's how we're working together, obviously with Contractor Commerce.
Was it an unusual move for someone to go from medicine to technology in that period of time?
I think, yes. I would say at the time, there weren't many people, going into like software engineering. I mean, I think there definitely were medics who were doing other things. Typically, it would be kind of consulting, investment banking, a little bit of kind of tech roles, but it was more on the kind of product side, like maybe being like a PM at Google or something similar. I'm not aware of any other doctors at a similar time who went into software engineering and worked on like full-time roles as a software engineer. Although I think since then, I actually have met a fair few people, so I think it's kind of becoming a little bit more common. And to some extent, it's a bit of a reflection on the state of the NHS in the UK that I think that there are a fair few like push factors that are causing doctors to leave. In my case, that wasn't really the driving force. But I think since I kind of like left healthcare, I think things in the UK have got a little bit worse from that perspective, and so there's more people now looking to do other things.
Can you draw a comparison to what you know to be true about healthcare and medicine in the United States versus the UK, or is that not an area of interest?
Yeah, no, I definitely can talk to it at a high level. I mean, I've never worked in the US healthcare system. I mean, obviously, main difference is like UK, it's like fully state funded pretty much. You kind of have the NHS. I think, as you can imagine, the fact that it's fully state funded means that, for a lot of people, they get this like amazing care and they don't have to pay anything, which is quite remarkable. But then there's also a lot of, inefficiencies in the system that kind of come from the fact that I believe NHS as a company is maybe the second or third largest employer in the world in terms of the number of employees. So, there's really a ginormous organization. In terms of how that compares to the US, I know that, yeah, obviously the US incentive structure is different. You have these insurance kind of providers, and the company Anterior was working at, we did a lot of working with insurance companies. So I understand how the incentives like flow through that system. And I think, again, there's kind of like pros and cons to that. I think there are cases where you get maybe like perverse incentives that can then affect how decision-making is being made in a clinical setting. My general impression is that I think doctors are better taken care of in the US than in the UK, which probably also reflects, a bit reflective of this kind of like private versus states funded approach. And yeah, I get the impression that somewhat like medicine is maybe more prestigious. I think in the UK, it historically has been, but I think these days it's not seen as like a particularly prestigious career. And yeah, generally the sense is that doctors are not particularly well taken care of, and that's from from things like administrative support. So like doctors will often spend time in the UK doing a lot of admin work. They'll sometimes have to like manage their own rotas and work like rota coordinators, all that kind of thing. There's a whole rabbit hole could go down there, but yeah, I think that's some like high level differences.
I think the oversimplification that we use is it's very tricky. It's a very tricky, complex business. Now, looking back, the decision to go to medical school versus going into software engineering, would you have still gone to medical school, or would you bypass that and went straight into engineering?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm kind of torn both ways. I think the way things have worked out, I think has generally been quite good for me in the sense that I had this medical kind of foundational understanding. I then moved into the AI space. I moved in kind of 2016, 2017. It was relatively early. Then we've seen this big wave of like large language models. It's meant that I have ended up in a position that is quite nice from the perspective of I have a lot of medical domain expertise, having spent 8-9 years studying and working, but then also have the AI expertise, and I have occupied like a very clear niche there where there is a lot of kind of value to be added, which I think has been helpful. The flip side is it took a really long time to get there because I spent 8-9 years studying medicine, then 8 years working in AI. So yeah, I guess the counter argument would have been that I probably could have more directly gotten to differentiated place maybe by focusing on one of those. But I also have a bit of a sense that with the way things are going with AI, any kind of differentiation or niche, I think is a value. It's something that there's more defensible against the like kind of march of AI being able to do more and more things. And so probably in that sense, it maybe gives me a bit more longer term career defensibility, I hope. We'll see.
Think back to medical school. Think of some of your contemporaries and peers who were not tech forward. So they were never going to be software engineers. They were high touch. Let's think like primary care physicians or specialists. How has AI changed their interactions with their patients? Is it better? Is it worse? Are they getting, what are you hearing from those folks?
Yeah, so I would say up until recently, really not that much. Up until about 2-3 years ago, and probably like post LLM periods, I think there was a lot of AI kind of going on and people publishing papers and doing work, but we didn't see a particularly strong translation of that to the hospital in general. Then with LLMs, I think we're now in the early stages of seeing quite high adoption for ambient scribes in particular, which is where you have your microphone, whether it's a device or it's on your computer, listening to your consultation, and then an AI basically writes up a draft of your notes at the end. That's both in the US and in Europe has seen a lot of adoption and seems to be kind of like the first real use case I see of AI in healthcare that is actually being used on a widespread level and changing people's workflows. And so a lot of my friends talk about using these and talk about the pros and cons of different ones. And I think that's mostly the extent of things so far in terms of the impact of AI. And I see it almost as the medical side is probably the wedge to get started with. And now all those companies are thinking about expanding out into things adjacent to the medical notes, which might be preparing notes before the patient comes in. It might be taking actions further downstream once you've had that initial consultation. But I think overall, we're still pretty early stage of really seeing an impact of AI in healthcare, I would say.
I can think of stories where people will get their blood work or an MRI or some sort of CAT scan, and then they'll immediately put that into ChatGPT or some other, some other app, and start diagnosing themselves, sharing that information with their back and forth with their doctor. At what point does that intersection happen, or is it even possible where the human physician is not as knowledgeable as the AI physician, if that's even a thing? And what does that world look like as things are growing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I think it's a good point that there is so much of this, like kind of direct to consumer, users just talking to ChatGPT and with their data. And I think there's no pros and cons to that. I generally think that there's a lot of benefit that a user can get from being able to talk to these models and explain things. And even as a former doctor, I use it sometimes to check things, right? And to your point about what does the intersection look like? When do the models get better? I think in some sense the models are already more knowledgeable than a doctor in terms of breadth, because they've seen so much data, they know so much information, they're very much they're up to date. They don't have this human brain that forgets things in the same way that we do. I think where the human really benefits is right now is like the judgment, right? Like I think a classic example of this is if you use a medical term like shortness of breath. Somebody can kind of say, I have shortness of breath. Now, shortness of breath can mean many different things. There's a whole range from, I'm a bit breathless when I go for a run, which is quite normal, versus I'm lying in bed and I can't breathe well. And doctors are very good at discerning. And I think the main thing you learn from practicing medicine is what is normal, what's not normal, and where do people fall on this spectrum? Because you can have shortness of breath. It might be you're fine, go home. It might be that you need oxygen. It might be that you need antibiotics. It might be like a whole range of treatments that are appropriate, that I think today humans have the upper side on the kind of judgment things, particularly like trained, qualified clinicians who've seen people, can physically examine the patients, etc. But I think in terms of the raw knowledge and knowing all the latest research and the latest papers, it's a very hard ask for doctors to keep on top of just the breadth of that. Maybe there's some kind of bit in the middle where the AI is helping them to do that. And I think you're seeing that with platforms like Open Evidence or the platforms that enable doctors to use AI to search for latest literature and guidelines and research. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see exactly how this does play out and what the kind of human AI hybrid looks like, or how it evolves.
The parallel to my world of home services and homeowners and those things, like diagnosing problems and coming up with solutions and all that is so clear to me. But of course, this is what I do for a living. At what point do you predict that the judgment will favor AI, or at all? Like, gosh, it's so fast.
Yeah, I mean, my gut is that I think there will always be a combination of both. Like I think fundamentally AI and humans have different strengths and weaknesses, and the best is probably somewhere in the middle, like a kind of complementary use of both. And I think it's to be determined exactly what that looks like, but it's probably leaning on the benefits of AI, that it can be so up to date with all the research and can read so many papers and have all of that knowledge kind of in its head, versus humans that can then examine the patients, that can then use their clinical judgments, use their kind of human empathy and their ability to interpret conversations, and use the AI in service of the human, and also use the AI at different parts of the patient's journey, because it might be that early on AI for triaging or for giving this initial feedback or explaining test results. AI also has infinite amounts of time, which humans don't have. So there's value to be had of, you have your 10-minute doctor consultation and they explain your test results, but then you want to really like kind of deep dive into that with your AI. Then I think there's a lot of value to be added there as well. But yeah, the short answer is I'm not too sure. We'll see exactly how it does play out.
all you know about AI and the way it's progressing, do you think you as a human being would you have a better outlook on your life if you were born, 20 years prior to when you were born or 20 years later than today, based off of where you
Oh, I
see things
see.
going?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. And I think the root of this question, right, is, what kind of impact will AI have? I guess you can wait, like in general, I mean, both in a healthcare context
Yeah.
and also more broadly.
Yeah.
I would say I lean optimistic in that I think there are a lot of amazing things that AI could unlock, including like the healthcare and life sciences domain. Definitely has the potential to really accelerate research, accelerate our rate of discoveries, and give us the ability to understand and treat many more diseases than we can today. The flip side is for sure there's risks, and so we can definitely expect to see a lot of disruption, I think, from AI developments. My gut though is that I would probably love to live in 20 years in the future, with the caveat being that I actually love that I am at my kind of current age and current career stage right now, where we can like really live and experience this transformation. I think it's a very cool time to be alive, just to see how things play out, and we don't know exactly how things will look, but I'm hopeful that think about my daughter and the younger generation. I'm hopeful that for them things will be radically different in a positive way, where you might have diseases that they're like, oh, so weird that you guys used to die of that disease, or used to have to worry about this, in the same way we have some things that we think were kind of crazy to die from like 50 years ago.
It's interesting, as I've asked other people similar questions, you either skew negative or positive, and you clearly skew positive. Let's talk about timing. So you said you're glad you're in it. When you're in it, at the age you're in it, and the part of your life you're in it. You were getting into AI in 2015, 2016, when that was like a buzzword is not even a close way to describe it. Like we couldn't really place the words to describe what AI would do. Talk to me about what was interesting to you then, and I want to know about what you predicted, what you didn't predict, the surprises, et cetera. So what was going on back in 2015?
Yeah, so to be honest, what was interesting for me actually when I think back to that time is, I think there's always this sense when there's some kind of technological shift and you kind of start getting involved in it, like, oh, am I too late to the party? Like, has all the fun been had? And it might sound crazy now saying this in 2026, that even in 2015, 2016, I had a sense of, oh, am I a bit late? Like, have I kind of missed the interesting AI developments here? We've got these convolutional neural networks that are performing super well and diagnosing chest X-rays or retinal scans better than humans. Like, okay, was that like the big moment for AI? I think, to the other parts of your question, how did I think it would play out, and how did how was it different to what I expected? I don't know. I mean, I had the sense that I think things were going to progress. I had a sense that it would move towards kind of more multimodal, in a sense that at the time imaging was really the focus. There was like NLP research where every type of NLP task was broken down into like a specific task, and now if you have LLMs that basically do all of them at the same time. I had the sense that things were generally going to generalize, but I think even back then there was a discussion about, okay, is there like an AI winter coming? Actually, this idea of like this kind of scaling laws. Can you just keep scaling data compute and see these sorts of returns? And I remember, because I went back to do a master's at university, which was a machine learning degree, and some of my lecturers were like very skeptical of the scaling hypothesis and like whether you could just scale it. And actually, the way it's played out is literally you just scale it and it keeps getting better. So I think that probably was counterintuitive for many people as well. I think they thought that it would plateau much sooner than it has, and now I'm even I think the consensus is not clear whether it has plateaued or starting to plateau or not. I think probably not, but yeah.
In a conversation with you and your team, I think it might have been Gabor who said it, that the things we were talking about together in September are fundamentally different than the things we're talking about now in February. So for context, we worked together on a project. What has changed since just the fall to, the first quarter of 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind of generation of models that were released predominantly, as I say, by like Anthropic and OpenAI during that period. I think some kind of threshold was crossed that is most visible in software engineering and in programming, where mid to late last year the models were pretty good. They could do good autocomplete. They could do good guidance under, like human prompting, and you had the kind of like whole vibe coding concept, and you had this kind of cursor-based approach where you're in an IDE, you're in like your kind of coding environment. You'll tell the models to make some changes that makes them. You review it. It does like a pretty good job. But there was some kind of leap that in these models and in the power of them that enabled them to move more towards, working pretty autonomously to a very high level of accuracy on these kind of coding tasks. Where now you can just say, and using like Claude Code or Codex, that's two of the most popular models, is to, just ask them to do it, go and do some kind of task. That can have 3-4 different components to it, and it'll kind of go away, it'll execute that, and then it'll come back, and it'll be to a very high standard. And it's obviously not perfect. There's bits of that to iron out, but I think that was just a fundamental shift in how software engineering can be done. And it opens the question of, well, what does this now look like for the other domains? I mean, there's a few reasons why software engineering is an obvious first place to do it. Partly because all the people building and interested in AI are there writing software. And it's also because it's a very verifiable domain where the code either runs or it doesn't, it either works or not. But the question is, okay, for all these other domains, including healthcare, what does it now look like if you try and take these powerful models and get them to run more autonomously and make bigger decisions and make bigger plans and follow through on them and this sort of thing?
Not years ago, just maybe a year ago, the conversation was to young students, you need to learn how to code. Fast forward to today, what advice do you give students?
Yeah, this is a really tough one. I guess the high level heuristic here is probably lean into things that differentiate humans and that we will always need, even if the AI keeps on getting better. And the answer to that, or a first pass answer to that, is probably things like human communication skills and empathy and soft skills that AI can't do in the same way. Maybe a few other. I'm trying to think, because I think this is a very hard question, and thankfully my daughter is young enough that I don't have to ask these questions yet. But I think at some point, we'll have to think of what makes the most sense. But I guess another approach that I think does make a lot of sense as well is just keeping as close to the AI frontier as possible. So just mastering AI tools, knowing how to leverage different tools for different things that you're working on. Because I think there'll always be value for that. And I think actually, because we're kind of like in this bubble, we're quite close to the AI frontier of really investing a lot of time there. We are actually in a tiny minority. And I remember seeing this graph, which was like all of the human population plotted out as squares, and the squares that are actually using ChatGPT or using AI at all is like a tiny fraction of the global population. So we are still a small microcosm of the overall population to be thinking about this and playing so much of these tools. So I think there will be a lot of value from being at the frontier of that. And then maybe it's a case of having AI plus whatever other vertical or industry you're interested in. It's like, as a homeowner, small business, healthcare, some other domain that you're in. But that plus AI feels like a kind of strong combination to have.
Good. It is a tough question. Things have changed so fast. Or my best guess for my kids that I've shared is like, you need to be a good learner, and you need to be able to learn and consume fast and stay close to things. Because we're all just kind of figuring it out. Like, what does it look like? You've shared a framework in the past that you have used to, I think the example I saw you go through was learning chess over a period of time. And this was a couple of years ago. So knowing what you know now, what is your framework for like accelerated learning of new skills and new tasks? Has it changed at all? I'd love some examples of how you do that in your life.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, in the past, and I think the video you're referring to is around. So that there's a software called Obsidian, and the software itself is not the most important thing, but the kind of design principles or philosophy behind Obsidian is having plain text files on your local computer that contain information, whether it's notes, highlights from articles you've read, content from courses you've taken, from videos you watch, all this kind of thing in one place. And I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do within that paradigm that helps you to kind of learn faster and to also keep reference of your knowledge that you can refer back to in future. But I think what has happened since I made that video, which was a few years ago, is AI. And I think AI is a massive force multiplier on top of that approach, because AI loves plain text files. It loves markdown files on your computer that it can read, particularly if you're using tools like Claude Cowork or Claude Code, which has access to your file system and can read your files. I think there's so much that can be done. I'm struggling a little bit to articulate it because I don't want it to sound like too abstract, but essentially, I guess it's a combination of a few things. You want somewhere that you can put kind of a condensed form of knowledge that you've kind of learned or thought about that you can then kind of refer to in future. You want some way to combine those pieces of knowledge that you've collected and aggregate them together and kind of build insight from that. And then I think you also want this ability to kind of interact and check with that. And I think that final step is where the AI really comes in. So to make a concrete example, let's say recently I was kind of reading about agentic AI and different kind of components of that, including like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and a few other techniques. And I took some courses, and I guess the approach that I would take is I will kind of consume that content. I will make some kind of notes while I'm doing it, which will all be just kind of in my own words, and maybe take some screenshots of relevant things and put those all into markdown files. And I use this software called Obsidian to do that. And then once I have that, I can then talk to a large language model that can see all of my notes that I've made. Let's say I took like 3 or 4 different courses, made a few notes. I can then chat to an LLM and say, look, I took these 4 courses. Please test me on these, the theory here using the Socratic method, ask me questions to check my understanding, and then have that back and forth interaction with the LLM. And the models themselves are very good at, if you give them some sort of content to anchor on, which could be these notes, this content from things that are consumed, they're very good at then coming up with prompts that really drill into your understanding. And I find now I really have the feeling that I can learn many times faster than I could in the past, because I used to have do a lot of extra work to kind of find my own gaps in my knowledge. So I take the course, and you can take a course and be like, okay, yeah, I understand this, and you generally feel content and you feel like you get it. But to really understand it, then you kind of have to identify, what did I not understand, or what gaps do I have here in my understanding? That's a whole process that you kind of have to do yourself. Now with AI, actually, you can get the AI to find those gaps for you. It also has the wider context outside the course. Maybe you did 4 different courses and you're trying to piece them all together. Well, the AI, an AI model will understand all these other, relevant theory on that subject, and I'll be able to bring those in. And yeah, in general, I find that incredibly helpful. And I think I'm only more, convinced of the value of taking this approach of having your own plain text files, which you can see through software like Obsidian, which your AI can see, and having this interaction with the AI, looking at your notes and kind of building up your learning and understanding that way.
So now you do consulting with businesses who are making the transition from traditional models to AI models. Tell me about that business. Tell me about your consulting, and I've got some pointed questions on, our listeners who might be making that transition.
So, some of the consulting work that I do, one part of it is often around baking in domain expertise into AI systems. It's something that I have a lot of experience with, particularly from a healthcare domain, but then actually also broadening that out into other verticals. And I have some opinions around ways that can be done well, ways that can be done less well. So, a lot of the companies that I have kind of gone in and worked for, that's sort of the high level guiding heuristic. What that exactly looks like in practice, and I think really depends. And one of the challenges I think with AI consulting generally is that the exact needs of every business is very bespoke. There's not an obvious what do you say, kind of cut and paste solution in the way that maybe consulting in other areas in the past has been. I think there's so many different ways you can leverage AI, and it's so use case dependent that you kind of really need to go in and like figure it out on a use by use, like case by case basis. Um, so yes, but I think that the high level heuristic in many cases is kind of baking domain expertise, building a system around that. Um, some of my kind of philosophies on this is that you want some sort of way to capture domain expertise in data that can then drive your system. So in a healthcare context, that might be that you want to capture data on like what is a correct medical decision or an incorrect medical decision and why. And there's many things you can do with that downstream. In a homeowner context, or let's say, we've worked together on a kind of chat experience that recommends products. Again, there's a lot of different variables you want to consider when you're recommending a certain product to a homeowner, and you also want to be able to build a system that will kind of learn and improve over time. And I view that as a form of baking kind of like domain expertise. What is it that a homeowner kind of cares about in different contexts, that can then be used to improve the kind of product and the overall quality of the recommendations they get, the quality of the experience that they have. And what is the underlying system that you can create which enables your application to continually improve in the direction of what you want. And I think that's where a lot of the kind of challenge in applying AI today is. I think you can get very quickly to a very nice you kind of like baseline prototype that can work well. But I think the deep value add is then actually kind of going that last mile, like solving this last mile problem of how do I really solve my specific use case in a differentiated way, with a system that will continually improve and learn over time.
Think about high touch businesses. Sort of like medicine, but in our case, we'll talk about like the residential heating, plumbing, air conditioning, electrical company. How should they be thinking about AI in their business as they're getting bombarded with lots of different messages and applications and those sort of things? Like, help them take a step back and think about AI differently.
Yes. So what would I say? I think I would say that there's obviously a pretty rapid rate of progress in AI and new applications and new approaches and way you can do things. The question for me is always working backwards from the problem. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve today, and where can AI fit into that? I think one failure mode is being too focused on the new solutions, new capabilities, and then trying to map that into your problem. Into your use case. You really want to start with the problem. What's going wrong? What kind of metrics do you want to improve? How could you make your current offerings better? And then you want to understand what the AI capabilities are today so that you can then slot things in. But I think a lot of that can come, really from tinkering, I would say. And I think I'm a big advocate now, with AI-powered coding and also like LLMs to just tell you what approaches might make sense to a particular problem. And there's a lot to be said for understand your problem and then just try and, even as a non-technical person, try and like build something, maybe build an app, maybe talk with ChatGPT, Claude, and understand how you might build some kind of automation or add something to improve a workflow that you have today, maybe a voice agent. Exactly what you build can vary, but I think that the barrier to entry to actually build useful things has never been lower. And so, I think in synthesis, it would be understand your problem, then try and think through, with the assistance of large language models and AI tools, what could solve that particular problem, and just start prototyping, experimenting, see where you get to.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I see a pattern here, at least in the US, where business owners are focusing on the potential solutions and trying to jam them into the business versus like starting at the problem, right? There's a lot of, grifting, I would call it, where there's just everything's an AI product that will change your business. And it's an interesting time.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think also like from a branding publicity perspective, sometimes leaning into this AI side as a solution, helps, right? Like you might get attention and people can talk about it. So I think there's a bit of a dichotomy between the solutions oriented mindset of, okay, I can use AI and maybe you can even create a flashy demo that doesn't really solve a problem that your business has today, but looks good, and then it can get attention, versus actually doing the hard work of identifying the problem and mapping the appropriate AI solution to that, and then really delivering value at the business level. But you can't neglect that there's some branding and kind of awareness that you might get from just talking about AI, even if you're not really solving problems with it.
Trying to think of what parallel to make here, almost like electricity or internet or air, but at some point, everything will just be AI. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think, yeah, I've definitely heard the electricity analogy before, and I do think that we will see AI just permeate through more and more things, and kind of fade into the background. I think one analogy people often make is there was this point in time, kind of technologically, when we started using databases and SQL databases, and everyone said, okay, that app is just like a database wrapper or SQL wrapper. And now SQL it's kind of in the background. It assumes that your application, you probably will use a SQL database, and it's kind of similar with AI. People criticizing early startups, so it's like an AI wrapper, but ultimately probably the application will move towards AI will be there in the background. It will power a lot of things. It's kind of assumed that you will use AI to some extent, but it's just going to be there.
What type of role or job should small business owners be thinking about having within their company, if any at all, to be able to take advantage of all the things that are available now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a question of whether do you need somebody to come in and perform some new role versus can you take your existing team and augment them with AI? And I think it will depend on the exact makeup of the team as it stands. Sometimes there's a lot of value just for having somebody who kind of comes in and brings that kind of innovation lens and is familiar with AI and can apply it. But in another scenario, you might have, let's say you have a product leader who now can lean more into AI and can prototype using AI and can collaborate with their engineers more effectively because they're leveling up their understanding. So I think there's no blanket kind of policy to apply, and I would probably err on the. Actually, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what I err on, but maybe on the conservative side of trying to level up kind of AI related capabilities within the company, and then see how that goes. And then actually, if you need to bring somebody in to really kind of supercharge things, then that is a very strong option as well. Yeah. And I think also from an engineering perspective, I think most engineers themselves, I think, will naturally become more kind of like AI pilled and leverage AI more and more in their work. And maybe even also their role might evolve a little bit as well, perhaps more in kind of product direction and steering things there.
If you were to guide someone who maybe they're I'm thinking of your transition from medicine to tech and AI. If you were to guide someone who's got a tech interest but doesn't know where to start, how would you make someone the AI expert in their business? What would the practical starting points? This might be certain blogs. This might be things that you found helpful and interesting to guide someone.
Yeah, so I think in the past, I kind of always recommended certain popular resources and courses and things like that for people to really level up their skills of AI. I think that has actually flipped a little bit now towards the best is just to get started and try building things and trying experimenting, because you can concretely build so much by using AI tools. And it might be, download cool code, download Cursor, start chatting to models, planning out some kind of project, use the understanding and the insight that you have of some particular problem or something that you're working on, and just see how far you can get with building something yourself. And maybe you run into a roadblock or there's something you don't understand. Well, when you're working on that, then get the LLM to explain it and kind of level up your understanding that way, and really do it from a problem first approach. And, supplementing that with courses and studying things formally as well can definitely be helpful. But my gut is now that the starting point is really just crack on and try and build it and try and fill in the knowledge that you need just to do the specific thing you're trying to solve in front of you.
So this is a more, tactical question. You've mentioned LLM, RAG or RAG, NLP, evals, agents. Kind of break down and help someone listening to this understand the lay of technology in the stack. What What are all of these things, and how do we wrap our mind around them?
Yeah. So one caveat is that things are moving pretty fast. So exactly what this stack and makeup looks like is changing over time. I think right now there's a big trend towards agentic systems, and I can talk about what that looks like. I guess the how might you break it up? One way would be, I mean, you have like the LLMs themselves, which is kind of like the intelligence layer, the logic, the thing that actually executes, that kind of like does the thinking, if we can say that. You then have the context, which is I have some like relevant information I want to give to the LM to enable it to decide what it's doing. And depending on where you're working, the context could be different. So it could be that you're a business owner and you have some kind of policies that you want to understand. Maybe you have like some returns policies and you have some other business practices like SOPs. Those could all be defined as documents or plain text. Or PDFs or whatever it might be, and they are context that you might feed to the model to enable it to make decisions. And those are two big components. And then I think the other thing component is kind of what sometimes described as the harness or the control structure around the LLM. I think in early days of LLMs, it was often that you would do these workflows where you just send data to the LLM, you get the response, and you kind of like handle that downstream. Now that we're moving more towards agentic, it's often that the LLM has many choices of things it could do. Those are often defined in tools, and it can do these multi-step flows where it will, decide I want to call this tool and get this information, then I want to call this tool and get something from my context, then I want to take this action, then I want to see the result of that action, and then do something else. And that's a kind of like rough on the fly conceptualization. Maybe is the actual LLM, the context, the harness, the structure around it. And I think those are some of the core components. And then you have things on top of that, like, evals, and you can evaluate all parts of your system to see how well it's performing and get insights into its performance, which is helpful. But yeah, I think those would be the kind of core three blocks, I would say.
This is a random thought I just had. I had watched your video that you'd done about a day in the life of a software engineer in 2020. And it was probably close to the March or April timeframe when the world was adjusting to the pandemic and all those sort of things. So the question I wanted to ask was, what would the day, how would that day look different in today's age? But I'm going to twist it a little bit. Think about if I remember when March of 2020 happened and the hunger for information, and people were just going online and Googling and reading news and social media, and it was wild. Give me your perspective on what would have happened if we were, if the pandemic had happened today with the tools and technology we have. Would it have? What would that have been like? I'll leave it very open there. What would that experience have been like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I wonder if, because one of the trends that we saw with the pandemic was that people suddenly kind of moved more online, right? Like a lot of meetings started happening online because everyone's working from home, and we all got more comfortable with Zoom and Google Meet, and even people who traditionally hadn't been using those now were. I wonder if maybe similarly, a pandemic now could potentially just be an accelerant for LLM adoption, right? In a sense that people would be inside more. People might therefore spend more time talking to LLMs, whether that's learning from them or whether it's getting advice from them or kind of interacting with LLMs in whatever way. And there are probably a bunch of second order effects of that I think you probably would have seen some people like learning faster from having that time and space and the ability to really like dive into interacting with LLMs. And yeah, I guess there's probably some kind of like interesting second and third order effects that would kind of come out of that. But yeah, I suspect that it probably would be a kind of force multiplier on adoption of LLMs, because also I know, like anecdotally, I know a lot of people whose like parents or grandparents obviously started using Zoom for the first time in the pandemic, or started using online delivery of groceries. So probably now you would then also tell your parents, grandparents to check, use large language models more, like check information and maybe get guidance around pandemic-related things, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It was a weird question, so thank you for indulging me by answering it, because I've often wondered, like, would it have made things better because there is this seemingly objective source of truth and information, or would it made it worse because it's typical hallucination or whatever it might be, or trust sourcing, those sort of things. Like, yeah, really random question, and I don't have to think about it anymore, so we just talked about it. You've been working with us for, a while now, and anything you find interesting about what we're trying to do in the market here for home services, and I'll leave that open as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the broader trend here that is very interesting is this movement towards agentic commerce and towards, what is the new relationship between, anybody who's purchasing something and the person selling that, like what does that relationship look like, and how can you better identify the most relevant kind of products and services for anybody at any one moment in time? And I think that the playbook is still to be written on exactly what that should look like how best for homeowners to like identify what they need, and how should that be tailored to their requirements? Like, how do you kind of understand firstly what they need, and then how do you map that to what you have available? And the obviously like traditional approach here is like keyword search, and these your Amazon search bar, you can kind of go in and search by words what you want. It feels like we will probably generally move away from that towards more of a kind of understanding the context on the individual, and them saying more things in free text and kind of getting to that end state. And there's a bunch of interesting downstream things there around obviously like the efficiency of finding the product, but also the what more you can kind of understand about them that might relate to other products and services that are relevant for them as well. And yeah, I think, I mean, those are some high level thoughts. I'm trying to think if there's anything else kind of deeper to add.
Maybe you could just expand a little bit and we can wrap up here, but expand. My market here is hearing agentic commerce for the first time. And we've built this category of e-commerce for contractors, and it's still e-commerce for contractors, but now involves agents. So talk about agentic commerce as a whole.
With agentic commerce, obviously and maybe this is helpful to be kind of like, be clear on what I mean by that. So obviously agentic commerce is the traditional e-commerce. You would find things usually by search terms, kind of looking through catalogs and browsing them. Whereas with agentic commerce, you are interacting with an agent, and that agent has the ability to find relevant products and services for you and present them to you, and you have a natural dialogue back and forth with that agent. And so it becomes, I guess, a lot more about how can that interaction with that agent work effectively? How can the agent understand your specific context, like what kind of things you require at the moment, and then map that over to the product and service that it has available, and kind of act as this middle person. And I think there's interesting technical challenges on both sides. From the kind of user side, you want to understand their situation, and maybe it's what kind of air filters do they have in their home today, and what are they looking for, and what's their budget, and various other pieces of information. How do you get that? And the simplest way is just kind of having a conversation. Maybe there's other ways you can share that data to make give the agent context. And then there's a kind of like a retrieval technical challenge on the other side, where you have all these different products and services and items that might be relevant for any particular individual, but actually understanding those items and therefore recommending them appropriately is quite a big technical challenge, particularly as you scale the number of items that you have in a catalog. And so I think that there's a lot of unsolved technical challenges around how do you really do that effectively at scale. I think we saw like semantic search and kind of vector embeddings and retrieval as a first version of that, and there's various levels of sophistication you can add on top of, like kind of simple semantic search to try and find products. But even that, definitely can fall down in a bunch of cases. So yeah, trying to solve that problem of then finding the most relevant things and kind of like mapping these two worlds together, mapping what is it the user really needs and what is it that's available and what is the best mapping of those two.
I'm back to drawing the parallel between medicine and technology, or medicine and AI, and thinking about, the world we believe in here at Contractor Commerce is that, a consumer should be able to go to a contractor's website and buy a full system of whatever they need for their home, whether it's a generator or an HVAC system or, a plumbing water heater, whatever it might be, without engaging with a human being, but having the human being to complement the process because it is a high touch field. Do you think we are correct in assuming that that's possible to be done at the highest level like it is now with humans?
Which part of it, the fact it's not the high touch element, or just generally this like fully kind of agentic?
Yeah, generally, I mean, just agentic commerce. So a homeowner being able to, have a world-class buying and shopping and checkout experience without involving a human being because of AI.
Yeah, so I think my take is that I think it's absolutely possible. I think it's absolutely achievable based on the current state of play of technology. But I think a lot of the challenges are no longer in the level of like the kind of LLMs themselves. And I think it's now much more in the actual kind of architecture and infrastructure you build around that. How do you, structure the data that you're retrieving from appropriately and give the LLM the right abilities to find and retrieve the relevant items such that it can present? And I think in general, most companies, when you're setting up your software stack, you're kind of building in the paradigm that exists today. And then if things move forward like they have with AI, then that's the work you have to do to kind of like shift over into that new world and kind of redesign your infrastructure for that. And I think that's a challenge that like all companies are undergoing or will have to undergo, is redesigning some of these primitives to be more kind of like agent ready and agent first. So yeah, I think it's absolutely achievable, this idea that you describe of this, like wonderful customer experience of using agents to find these products. And I think I believe it can concretely be a major advance on the current ways that customers make these decisions and do these purchases. But there's a non-trivial technical challenge to go along with that to get things to that place.
Awesome. And we've appreciated working with you guys on the project and excited about what's going to be coming out here shortly. So
likewise.
Final question, parting thoughts. What are you most excited about in the short term over the next 12 months or so with AI and what's possible? And this could be for, your professional endeavors or personal, but what's most exciting? What's around the corner that we're going to find out about?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the short answer is just seeing what sort of progress is made in the next 12 months. I think there's a lot up for grabs. I'm excited to see more kind of deep penetration of AI into existing businesses. I think that there's still a big gap between the capabilities of AI at the frontier and what you see a lot of the companies that are really at the forefront doing with AI. And I think there's this massive diffusion that can now happen from this raw, powerful technology out into businesses in every sector and every vertical. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. I think there's a few early examples in a lot of different verticals, but I think that we will see many more companies really leveraging AI in new and interesting ways this time, in the next 12 months. And I think that's going to be very exciting to see. I think one specific area that comes to mind is this idea of like personal agents, and you may have seen like OpenClaw and this kind of shift towards having kind of truly autonomous AI agents that are elsewhere executing tasks for you and doing things in the background. I do think that's a sign for things to come, and I imagine we will see kind of upgrades and more of that. So I also think that we might see more kind of like quote unquote like AI employees. I think today you see a few early experiments. People are kind of quote unquote like hiring AIs and have like an OpenClaw that they train up and get it to do various different things. I think we will, this time next year, I think we'll have seen a lot more of that and probably more concrete, use cases and applications as well.